Peace be upon you, Rafiq. We just came from part 39, where we installed a strict discipline. Before dynamics, before stories, before we earn the right to speak about how reality behaves, we permit only the minimum structure required for licensing. Anything extra is smuggling. The silent ground must remain silent. Now we arrive at a smuggling that is so common we barely notice it. Because it is the language of daily life, the language of school books, the language of every headline about the cosmos. We say, this is 2 meters long. We say, that took 5 seconds. We say, the energy is so many joules. We say, the universe is this many years old. And we feel as if we have spoken about reality itself. But part 40 is the moment we stop and say, no, not yet. Not at the foundation. Because undifferentiated phi contains no meters, no seconds, no joules, no intrinsic scales at all. Units are not part of the silent ground. Units are not part of the primitive. Units are not baked into the universe like labels on a factory product. Units come later, with rulers. And the reason is not philosophical decoration. It is operational, firewalled, and testable. If science is reconstructible comparison, part 37, and if two models that produce the same encoder outputs are scientifically the same, part 38, and if we must not smuggle extra primitives before licensing, part 39, then we cannot allow meters or seconds to appear at the foundation, because a meter and a second are not things. They are comparator standards, agreed procedures for counting and matching. A meter is not a cosmic ingredient. A second is not a cosmic ingredient. A joule is not a cosmic ingredient. They are names for ratios. Ratios between an unknown and a standard we choose. And that is the no units, no scales seal. Let me tell it as a story you can feel in your bones. Imagine a symphony before the first note. Not quiet music, not a soft hum. I mean the kind where nothing is happening that counts as sound. In that silence, you cannot say, the tempo is 120 beats per minute, the pitch is A4, the duration is 4 minutes, the rhythm is in 3/4 time. Those are not properties of silence. Those are properties of music once it begins. And even then, they are properties that appear only when a comparison standard is introduced. A metronome, a tuning fork, a clock, a shared convention among musicians. Silence contains no tempo. Silence contains no pitch. Silence contains no duration. Silence contains only the possibility that sound could become structured. Phi is that silent ground, the pre-structure permission layer. It is the condition that makes distinction possible, not a library of already labeled quantities. So if someone says, in the silent ground, a second exists, they have already smuggled in a clock. If someone says, in the silent ground, a meter exists, they have already smuggled in a ruler. If someone says, in the silent ground, a joule exists, they have already smuggled in a whole thermodynamic machine that defines work, time, mass, and length. The silent ground does not come with instruments inside it. Units are not the ground. Units are what we bring to the ground. Now imagine you are a map maker who has landed on a continent no one has ever charted. You carry paper. You carry a pencil. You carry courage. But you do not yet carry a standard meter stick, and you do not yet carry a universal clock synchronized with a distant empire. You begin anyway. You make the first measurements the way humans always do before standardization, This tree is 50 paces from the river. This hill is a half-day walk from the beach. This valley is 3 songs long if you sing while walking. This rock is heavier than that rock. These are not stupid measurements. They are the beginning of measurement. But notice what they are made of. Comparisons. A pace is a comparison to your stride. A day's walk is a comparison to your endurance. A song is a comparison to your breath and rhythm. Heavier is a comparison to the tilt of a balance. There is no meter in the land itself. There is no second in the land itself. There is no kilogram hiding under a stone. The land has relationships: near, far, higher, lower, heavier, lighter. The unit system is a shared agreement that stabilizes those relationships into public, reconstructible numbers. First, you measure by paces. Then, because people argue, because a tall person and a short person disagree, you invent a standard: the king's stride, the guild's rod, the temple's staff. Later, because kingdoms trade, you standardize again. Later, because science demands precision, you standardize again. And eventually, because you want the standard not to depend on a particular king or a particular metal bar, you define units by repeatable natural processes. But every step is the same kind of thing. Pick a repeatable standard, compare unknowns to it, count, share the procedure. That is why units are not primitive. They are the final packaging of a comparator chain. Phi contains comparability. Phi does not contain packaging. Here is the key insight that makes the seal feel inevitable. Measurement is ratio first. When you measure length, what you truly obtain is not meters. What you truly obtain is this length is x times the length of my standard rod. X is a pure number. When you measure time, what you truly obtain is this duration is y times the period of my standard clock. Y is a pure number. When you measure energy, what you truly obtain, if you chase the chain far enough, is this process corresponds to Z times some standard process we have defined and stabilized through calibration. Z is a pure number. The world you can share publicly is a world of ratios that can be reconstructed. Units are the names we give to the chosen denominator. You can change the denominator and the ratio stays meaningful. If I say, this room is 3 meters long, and you say, this room is 10 feet long, we are not in metaphysical disagreement. We are speaking different packaging over the same relational content. So the silent ground, the layer before packaging, must be unit-free. Otherwise, you have built the label into the fabric, which is exactly what Part 39 forbids. Now the firewall sharpens. If undifferentiated phi contained intrinsic units, that would mean there exists a unit value that is true independently of any comparator standard. It would mean a meter is a fact of the universe even if no one can build a ruler. It would mean a second is a fact of the universe even if no one can build a clock. It would mean there is a scale out there that is not derived from the act of counting cycles or comparing length. But this collides with everything we have built. Part 6 said the public world is relational and gauge clean. Absolutes don't survive perspective shifts. Part 37 said science is reconstructible comparison. No procedure, no public fact. Part 38 said if no observation distinguishes two claims, science cannot distinguish them. Part 39 said don't smuggle structure before licensing. Intrinsic units would be the biggest smuggling of all, a claim to have a ruler before rulers exist. So part 40 seals it. Undifferentiated phi has no intrinsic meters, seconds, joules, or any scale at all. Scales are not found. They are installed by calibration, by creating stable cyclic standards and counting. Now let's make this even more tangible with a simple device, a clock. What is a second? Most people feel a second is a slice of time that exists whether you measure it or not. But operationally, what you can share publicly is not a mystical slice. It's a procedure. A pendulum clock defines time by swings. A quartz clock defines time by crystal vibrations. An atomic clock defines time by cycles of radiation from an atom's transition. No matter how sophisticated the clock, it has the same backbone. Something repeats, you count repeats, you name a certain count as 1 unit. A second is not a substance. It is not a cosmic ingredient. It is a count of cycles. So ask, does phi contain seconds? No, because seconds are a label we attach to counted cycles after differentiation supplies stable periodic phenomena. But does phi contain the possibility of cycles? Yes, that's already planted in part 8. Phi's value space is cyclic. Closure, return, repeatability. Those are seeds. So the story becomes coherent. Phi is cyclic in potential. Closure is in the primitive architecture. Differentiation can actualize stable periodic processes. We can use those periodic processes as standards. We count cycles. We create units. So time units are not pre-installed. They are earned. Now the ruler. What is a meter? Historically, humans tried to define length by Earth's dimensions or by a metal bar. But those standards are fragile. Earth changes, metal expands, kingdoms fall. So science pushed towards something repeatable and universal. Light. If you define length using how far light travels in a fixed fraction of a second, you haven't discovered a meter hidden in the universe. You have created a better comparator because it uses stable, repeatable phenomena and ties length to a clock. But the structure is still the same. 1. Pick a repeatable process, light propagation, atomic transitions. 2. Define a standard count or fraction. 3. Compare unknown lengths to that standard via procedures. 4. Share the procedure publicly. So length units are not pre-installed. They are constructed. And crucially, they are constructed from cycles and counts. A wavelength is a cycle in space. A clock tick is a cycle in time. Measurement becomes counting cycles across a window. That is why the seal's prediction is not vague. It is specific. Prediction. All physical units will reduce to calibration against cyclic standards. In plain language, the deepest measurement standards will always be based on repeatable cycles. Because cycles give us something countable. And countable things can become public, reconstructible facts. Now let's do the falsification properly. Because without falsification, this becomes merely pretty. Core claim. Undifferentiated phi contains no intrinsic units and no intrinsic scale. Falsification challenge. Find the fundamental quantity with inherent units that are not derived from comparator standards. Not a constant we can measure. Not a number with meters written beside it. But a quantity whose unitness is intrinsic, unavoidable, present even before any calibration protocol exists. If someone could produce such a quantity, part 40 would break. So let's test the usual suspects. the so-called fundamental constants. People point to the speed of light, Planck's constant, the gravitational constant, the electron mass, the elementary charge. They look fundamental. They look like the universe's own numbers. But watch what happens when you chase the procedure. The speed of light is written as meters per second. But meters and seconds are definitions that humans choose. We can choose units where the speed of light is 1. That means its numerical value depends on our packaging. Its unitness is not intrinsic. It is a conversion factor between our chosen length label and our chosen time label. Planck's constant is written as joule seconds, but joules are defined using kilograms, meters, and seconds. Again, not intrinsic, packaging. In a system where we choose action as our base, we can set Planck's constant to 1. Again, not intrinsic unitness, but a bridge between conventions. The gravitational constant is written with a complicated unit expression. Again, conventions stacked on conventions. Change the base units, the number changes. It is not an intrinsic scale etched into phi. It is a conversion factor between labels. Even the kilogram used to be defined by a physical artifact. That's a smoking gun. A unit based on a cylinder in a vault is obviously not ontologically primary. It's a public comparator, nothing more. So the typical fundamental constants with units do not falsify the seal. They demonstrate it. Their unitness is entangled with how we define our standards. What remains more stable, what looks more like the universe's own speech, are dimensionless constants, pure ratios, numbers that do not change when you change units. Those are closer to the unit-free world the seal predicts. So the falsification task remains open and sharp. If someone can show a quantity whose units cannot be eliminated by moving to a different comparator basis, whose scale is present without any calibration protocol, then the no units, no scale seal fails. Until then, the seal stands as a disciplined inference from the operational structure of measurement itself. Now we take one more step deeper, because there is a common confusion here. Someone might say, even if units are conventions, surely the universe has a real scale. Surely a proton is really small. Surely the universe is really big. Yes, real patterns exist. Real ratios exist. Real comparative structure exists. But really small and really big are still comparative statements. Small compared to what? Big compared to what? Fast compared to what? Old compared to what? Even when we think we are speaking absolutely, we are speaking relationally. We are speaking in a language that requires a reference point. The no units, no scale seal does not deny that there are stable relations. It denies that the labels meter and second are written into the primitive. It says, the world can have structure. The world can have ratios. The world can have stable cycles. But the names and unit packages are what appear when we build public comparators. Now let's connect it back to the heart of your architecture, so the listener always knows where we are in the journey. Part 37 said science is reconstruction. You don't own truth. You own procedures others can repeat. Part 38 said if two models produce identical encoder outputs across all licensed windows, there is no scientific difference between them. Hidden essence cannot be scientifically meaningful if it never changes what we can observe. Part 39 said don't smuggle. Don't bring in extra furniture before you've built the floor. Now Part 40 says units are furniture. Scales are furniture. They are not part of the floor. They are immensely useful furniture. But they do not exist at the permission layer. They exist at the calibrated, differentiated layer. So the seal does two things at once. One, It keeps the ground silent. 2. It prepares the way for how units will later appear without mystery, through cyclic standards, counting, calibration, and reconstruction. And that is where we're going next, toward how closure, topology, and cyclicity force exactness and integer structure, and how calibration anchors emergent units to repeatable cycles. Now let me give you everyday examples so the listener doesn't drift into abstraction. Example 1. Measuring a table. You put a book on a table. You measure the table with a tape measure. You say it's 120 centimeters long. But what did you really do? You compared the table to a strip of material with marks on it. Those marks were created by comparing to a standard. That standard was created by comparing to an even deeper standard. And eventually you reach a calibration chain tied to repeatable processes. The number 120 is not the table's essence. It is the table's ratio to your chosen standard. The table contains wood and shape and relationship. The centimeter contains history, agreement, calibration. So unitness is not in the table. Unitness is in the comparator chain. Example 2. Waiting for a kettle. You wait for water to boil. You say it took 2 minutes. But what did you really do? You counted the ticks of your clock. Your clock counts cycles in a crystal or an atom. You compared the boiling process to a repeatable periodic standard. You named a certain count minute by convention. The boiling contains physical processes. The minute contains a standard count. So unitness is not in the kettle. Unitness is in the comparator chain. Example 3. Temperature. You say the room is 20 degrees Celsius, but degrees Celsius is defined relative to water's freezing and boiling, and now tied into more fundamental standards through calibration. Temperature, as a public number, is not a raw property floating in the air. It's a standardized translation of a statistical pattern into a scale we can share. Again, ratio plus calibration plus convention. So unitness is not in the air. Unitness is in the comparator chain. Now we can say the listener carry in a way that actually bites. Units come later, with rulers. If you want to keep the silent ground silent, you must stop yourself from saying meters and seconds at the foundation. You must say instead, there are distinctions, there are relations, there are repeatable cycles possible, there are ratios that can be stabilized into public measurement only after calibration. And once you start thinking this way, you gain a strange freedom. You stop mistaking the label for the structure. You stop mistaking the map legend for the terrain. You stop thinking the universe speaks English or SI units. You begin to hear reality in the language it actually uses for public science. Comparisons, invariants, and repeatable procedures. That is why this seal is not a limitation. It is a purification. It forces honesty. And now, one final brief line, because the listener deserves to know where the formal backbone lives without interrupting the flow. For those who want the technical foundations behind this architecture, the formal works can be found on Zenodo by searching Holophase. So here is part 40, sealed. Undifferentiated Φ is scale-free, unit-free. No meters, no seconds, no joules. Only the possibility of distinction and the possibility of cyclic standards that, once differentiation arrives, can be counted, compared, and calibrated into the units we use. Prediction. All physical units reduce, at root, to calibration against repeatable cycles. Falsification. Find a fundamental quantity with inherent unitness that is not derivable from comparator standards. Until then, the silent ground stays silent. Listener carry forward. Units come later, with rulers. Salam, peace be upon you.